Pressure walking like the sidewalk and the trees and the leaves that fall off the trees.
Ankles coming out. So I said to her,
I've never seen a chart.
My mother bill's about 9
Like to
I'd like to call tonight's meeting to order, City Council special meeting, February 22nd, 6 o'clock, and for the purpose of our water and wastewater rate study. Before we have roll call, I'd like to stand for a moment of silence and a flag salute offered by Mr. Slaby. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Ms. Jones, can we have a roll call, please?
Mayor Jerome?
Here.
Ms. Tillett?
Here.
Mr. Rolfson?
Here.
Ms. Rich?
Here.
Mr. Slavy?
Here.
Mr. Crail?
Here.
Mr. Roulette?
Here. Hey, Mr. Pasteur.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, we've scheduled this workshop to go into further detail with the proposed rate adjustments as it pertains to water, wastewater, and reclaimed water. Back on January 5th, our consultants on this project, PRMG, provided an overview of the recommendation as it pertains to those various utilities and recommended some pretty sizable increases as it pertains to water and wastewater. And so at that point, I think the council decided that went forward with scheduling a public hearing for March 1st, of which has been advertised, but it would be beneficial for the council to have a better understanding in more detail as to how the consultants came up with the rates that were proposed. Following that, in late January, we sent the draft report to the council, posted it on the website for anyone to review. It's about 130 pages with a lot of detail in there, but from my standpoint, very well organized for me to follow. So with that tonight, we have Brian Mance. I think Henry Thomas will be joining us sometime here shortly. But they put together a quick PowerPoint, and I looked at it today. Maybe we might not need to go into all the slides, but just to provide a general overview, if you will, and then get into some of the details and questions you may have as a council related to the study itself.
is this the same PowerPoint as shown before? Is this a new one?
I think there's some revisions, particularly goes into looking at a couple of alternatives in the event if we were to try and phase it out and what the impacts would be.
Hard copies up there?
The hard copies are, back there.
Yeah, maybe take a new one if it's a new one.
Okay, nothing's changed from, you didn't change anything from it, did you, Brian?
No, none of the recommendations changed.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Mark.
Anybody else want one before, since we're handing them out? No? Okay.
Well, thank you. For the record, my name is Brian Mance. I'm with Public Resources Management Group, and hopefully my boss, Henry Thomas, will be joining us shortly, but in the meantime, we'll go ahead and get started. And as Mr. Pasteur mentioned,
We want to kind of recap some of the issues that were brought up in the January 5th presentation, and I also am going to hopefully answer some of the questions that were also brought up during that meeting to provide more information about the recommendations. So to begin the recap from the January 5th presentation where we had a discussion, the last formal rate analysis was performed in 2007. And of course, the city has been regularly updating, has been raising rates on a regular basis with the last rate adjustment in October 2014. But what we've done is prepared a financial forecast to reflect current conditions, and as we communicated on January 5th, we've identified financial sustainability issues and need for rate adjustments. And as Mr. Pastou mentioned, subsequent to the presentation, we did provide a report for the city's review and consideration. As you may recall from the January 5th presentation, we're showing that without the need for rate adjustments, we have an inability to fund all of the identified revenue requirements, capital program, and to meet the financial targets that were represented. And our financial targets, as you may recall, were working capital of 90 days equal to 90 days of rate revenue, and a capital replacement reserve equal to 1 year of annual depreciation expense. We also discussed the financial risks of not adjusting rates at this time, and the primary risk being that user rates may be even higher in the future because the capital needs for the system are not anticipated to go away, but they may be more expensive to address in the future. Certainly inflation and the costs of construction continue to affect system costs. Even during recessionary times, the Engineering News Record Construction Cost Index has continued to increase. There's also interest rate risk. Right now, interest rates, even though the Fed did increase rates in November, we're still close to historical lows, and so there is an opportunity, given there is an opportunity to debt finance at lower interest rates for the long-term benefit of system customers. Without the increases, we're limited in our debt financing capability. And certainly, since we have recognized debt financing in the capital funding plan, certainly when approaching lenders for money, one of the things they want to know is, can you repay the debt? And they would want the city to demonstrate that you do have a plan in place to repay the debt. And that's one of the reasons why it's good to have a plan already adopted that reflects the anticipated debt payments associated with the debt financing. With respect to major issues currently affecting the utility system, we talked back in January 5th about capital projects totaling about $35.6 million. That includes renewals, repairs, and upgrades to the utility system, which is just a public health and safety issue, reliability of service. As assets approach the end of their useful lives, they need to be replaced or rehabilitated. Also, there are projects to support the growth of the city, line extensions and water treatment plant expansions. And also, as you well know, we have line relocations that are a requirement from FDOT that they're essentially a mandated requirement that needs to be funded. And we also want to try and prepare the utility for major capital expenditures beyond the fiscal year 2020, which was the end of the forecast period. We want to make sure that there's not going to be any future rate shock after this rate plan is implemented. We talked about, as part of the capital needs, and this is Henry Thomas, welcome. We talked about the renewal and replacement needs, and we do have some pictures here. One being the reclaimed water storage tank at wastewater treatment plant number 2, and also fire hydrants, some of which are 50 years old. We discussed this in January 5th, and we also talked about line break statistics, where we discussed the 64 water line breaks that had occurred since June of 2014. And one of the questions that was asked during the meeting was, what's been the major cause of those line breaks? And so we did come back with those statistics. It's been estimated about 25% of the line breaks are due to infrastructure age, 25% is due to trees, and the remaining 50% are due to humans or contractors. So here we have a breakdown of the different capital projects. As you can see, the primary capital projects are the line extensions and line relocations. The line extensions to support the growth of the city, the line relocations that are associated with the road widening from FDOT. But and so this gives you a breakdown which you have seen before. Back in January 5th, we did talk about the need for balanced debt risk, recognizing that certain capital projects are best funded. Any annual or routine capital projects should ideally be funded on a pay-as-you-go basis, whereas just one-time major expenditures, those would be good candidates for debt financing. And so we've recognized about 49% of the capital program being funded from additional debt proceeds. We're anticipating that these proceeds would most likely come from either bank loans or, if the city's lucky, some low-cost loans through the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, through the state revolving fund loan program, which a lot of utilities are currently taking advantage of. Certainly, we do anticipate that operating expenses are projected to continue increasing. The Congressional Budget Office has continued to project over 2% increase per year in consumer price indexes, but due to the regulatory environment and capital-intensive nature of utilities and the heavy dependence upon commodities such as chemicals and electricity, utility costs do tend to increase at a higher rate than general inflation. With respect to as we mentioned in January 5th, the revenues under the existing rates, which are represented by this dotted red line, are not anticipated to fund all the revenue requirements recognized for the forecast period. And so we have recognized the need to raise rates. And these are the rates that we talked about back in January. About an overall 21% adjustment effective April 1st of 2016, followed by more or less inflationary 3% adjustments afterwards. And of course, sometimes dollar amounts are a little less scary than percentage increases. And so this, on the ad for the first adjustment translates to an increase in the average customer monthly bill of about $13.76. And that's about $1.97 per 1,000 gallons. And of course, 1,000 gallons is a lot of gallons. But these increases would enable us to meet our financial targets in terms of having a debt service coverage above our target amount, having working capital above our target amount, and also having a balance in our cash for renewals and replacements equal to 1 year of annual depreciation. Because of the system's cash position, we are a bit limited in our ability to phase in the adjustments and still fund all the identified revenue requirements. As you can see, we're in this slide with the annual adjustment. You can see the adjustment for 2016 through 2020. As you can see, the cumulative adjustment over 5 years is 38.3%, and we gradually increase our working capital balance from about $1.13 million at the end of this year to about $3.5 million in 2020. Now, instead of if we wanted to phase in the rates a little bit more, that's what's shown in scenario 1, where we have a 12.7% adjustment in 2016, and then a 12.9% adjustment in 2017. From a working capital standpoint, we wind up at about the same place. However, you can see that in 2017, anytime you phase in rate adjustments, you're going to wind up with higher rate adjustments over the long term. And as you can see, if we did the 12.7 followed by the 12.9, the cumulative adjustment is 27.2, whereas if we just went with the 21.2 and then the 3.3 in 2017, we're about 1.5 to 2% lower. We did take a look at do we have the ability to completely do a full phase-in 6.8% per year, and just based on the timing of the cash flows that's been recognized in the analysis, we would show that by 2019 we would run out of working capital. And so, as I mentioned, this scenario 1 is a little bit, that is something that might work, but the rates would be higher by the second year. So, with respect to the adjustments, as approximately 3,300 of your customers have only water-only service, and that's pretty important because you have about 9,600 water customers and 6,300 wastewater customers. 6,300 both water and wastewater customers, and so about 3,300 customers would only receive the water rate adjustment. And as you can see, that's about an extra $5 per month. The city's existing water rates are among the lowest in the surrounding areas, and that's why the dollar effect of the increase is really not that great. And it's also important to realize is that 7,000 gallons is a lot of water. And this is something that I did bring up in the January 5th presentation, but to give you some comparison, the city of Eustis down the road uses about 5,000, their average residential customer uses about 5,000 gallons of water per month. Some of the other utilities we've worked with, Umatil is at 5,000, Orange City's at 6,000, the city of Edgewater is at 3,000, city of Maitland is at 6,000. So at 7,000 gallons of usage, that's on the high side of some of the other, probably statewide, we normally see around a 5,000 to 6,000 gallon average. So compared to Eustis, for example, Mount Dora, an average residential customer in Mount Dora uses about 40% more water.
Do we have any guess as to why that's the case?
Lawns, well, one might be that your rates are pretty low, and so there's not a lot of a big incentive to conserve water. That could be one reason. Okay.
One of the factors is demographics. If you have larger lots, if you have more wealth, you tend to use more water to irrigate and that type of thing. So what you'll find is the more affluent community tend to use more than the less affluent. So there's a factor there.
Yeah, but aren't they using also, the bigger homes over, I guess in the lakes of Mount Dora Country Club area, aren't they using reclaimed water for irrigation?
Country Club does not have reclaimed water. The lake does, but there's some larger subdivisions that do not. There's some larger lots within the what I call the city proper that don't have reclaimed, so they are very large users.
Which of the communities actually have the reclaimed? Does Loch Levin have reclaimed water?
Yeah, I believe they do.
What about the other?
Sullivan Ranch.
Sullivan Ranch.
Running Brook.
Well, Sullivan's outside the. Are they part of the city? They pay the premium, right?
Right. 25%.
Right. Okay.
Just Lakes and Outdoor, the lowest users, though, of the water, reclaimed water, real low. Only 2 people to a household,
I see now, I understand.
And John did bring up a good point in that the median household income of Mount Dora is slightly above the state of Florida average.
Could you describe somehow, I see a bell curve in my mind of the usage, but I don't imagine that's actually the case. I would think that some folks are very low water users, and then, it's a disproportionate group, but I don't know if you can, what's the word, scattergram, or see where they fall? Because I think some of those stair steps that we're going to talk about later, it kind of drives my thinking differently. If there's a household where the water bill represents a very large portion and they can control it, versus somebody who's tossing a lot of water on their yard, I think any reasonable person would say that we'd want our rates to acknowledge that behavior. And I know it does, but I just wanted to kind of see, order of magnitude, how where's the water go? Is it all... are there a lot of people that are under 7,000?
Oh,
Sure.
in my district, there are lots of people under 7.
Just real quick, this is for the audience. I will be letting the audience speak after a while. This is for the council to ask questions and everything, and hopefully in the process your questions will be answered. Write them down. If they're not, then when I bring the public up later, you can ask the questions at that point. Thank you.
So now the wastewater rates are a little bit higher than the water rates are, and so for the 6,300 wastewater customers, the difference under the proposed rates for a usage of 7,000 gallons, which again is on the high side, it would be $8.70. And so on a combined basis, that's where you get the $13.76. Another perspective to consider is to put these rates in terms of a cost per gallon. So for water, under the proposed rates at a usage of 7,000 gallons, that comes out to about 0.3 cents per gallon. On wastewater, this $56.23 translates to about 0.8 cents per gallon. And finally, this $77.14 translates to about 1.1 cent per gallon. So sometimes when you translate the price in terms of gallons, that's helpful for communication purposes. Now, another thing that we didn't really talk about in January 5th, on the January 5th presentation, that is a very important part of this, of our consideration, is whether the proposed rates are affordable. And the metric that is published by credit rating agencies and that has been recognized by the utility industry is 2%. The metric that's used is 2% or less of median household income. So if rates are 2% or less of median household income, they are considered affordable. So if we consider the median household income of Mount Dora, about $47,863, and we compare that to the $77.14 for 7,000 gallons of usage, we come to about 1.9% of median household income. However, as I mentioned, 7,000 gallons is a little bit on the high side, so we also took a look at what the proposed rates would look under the typical statewide averages that we see between 5,000 and 6,000 gallons per month. As you can see, if you compare the $65.48 for a usage of 5,000 gallons of water and wastewater service and $71.31 for usage of 6,000 gallons per month, you get a range of 1.6% to 1.8%. So anyway, you look at it from a utility industry metric, what the utility industry recognizes as affordable, these rates would be considered affordable. Now, with respect to how these rates compared with those of other utilities, it is important to recognize that a comparison is not a report card on how well a utility is doing, just because there's so many different types of reasons why utilities can have different rates. Some utilities have a brackish water source, part salt water, which is more expensive to treat than a freshwater source. Some have a greater amount of renewals and replacements that they need to take care of. Some have a greater availability of grant funding. There are a whole range of reasons why utilities can have different rates. But as a talking point, you can see that the proposed rates that are proposed to become effective on April 1st of 2016 are they're considered to be a little close to the average of what the neighboring utilities are charging. Another important takeaway from this chart is the utilities that are capitalized and have an asterisk next to them. These are the utilities that are either currently in a rate study, they're planning a rate study, or they already have a rate increase scheduled over the next 12 months. And so the idea being is that as time progresses, Mount Dora's position on this chart is anticipated to, Mount Dora is anticipated to continue being competitive in terms of rates. With respect to reclaimed water, as you can see, under our proposed rates at a usage of 10,000 gallons, the increase in the bill is $3.34, which is 10,000 gallons is even more than 7,000 gallons, obviously. But it is important to recognize that not all customers have access to reclaimed water service. There's only about 1,350 reclaimed water customers, and that compares with the 9,600 water customers. And of course, one of our recommendations is to gradually make the reclaimed water rates, price the reclaimed water rates closer to the potable water irrigation rates. The idea being that not everyone has access to reclaimed water service, and yet reclaimed water is essentially providing the same benefit as potable water irrigation. And so we believe that it makes sense to price them similarly.
Excuse me, that brings up my question. Unless when I look at the rate increases, so for irrigation, I see a rate of $2.46 for inside, $3.07 for outside, but for reclaimed, it's 36 cents for inside or 45 cents for outside the city. So that's nowhere near the same. I mean, we're talking the difference between $2 and $2.50 versus 36 cents.
You're starting out with super low rates, and...
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, when we looked at the rate structures, and Brian's point about the equity between reclaimed irrigation costs and potable is a valid point. The other side of this coin is that the reclaimed water serves a dual purpose. The other purpose is to get rid of your wastewater effluent and have a disposal place for that wastewater effluent. And there's savings involved to the utility to be able to expand reclaimed water services. So for this go-around, because of the magnitude of the increases, if you want, we could go back and look at higher reclaimed water rate increases. They basically got the same percentage increase that the water customers did. And that was due to the fact that we don't want to we want to expand the reclaimed water use per customer throughout the system. And again, you're coming from a past where you've looked at it more as a disposal item, in other words, a wastewater cost, as opposed to a commodity or irrigation cost.
My point is, though, that we will never, I don't think, inside the 441, inside the old part of the city, we will never get reclaimed water to irrigate our plants, our yards with, will we? Because we'd have to put in a whole separate set of pipes, wouldn't we? Pardon?
Yeah.
That we will never, correct? I mean, so I am correct in that assumption.
It's going to be a new development.
So it's only going to be new development, so...
That's correct.
And yet the old part of the city, sorry, the older part of the city, it has, yeah, me too, has throughout the years, I guess, paid to, in our rates and whatever capital improvement, paid to put pipes out in the new development as well as impact fees, but it's a combination. So we have helped subsidize this ability to have reclaimed water in the new developments, and yet they're going to be paying 36 cents and we're going to be paying $2.50. It just doesn't track to me. Now, maybe it's explainable, but I don't see it.
If I may, John Peters, Public Works Director. The key here is, and Henry just made reference to it, is right now, if you look at the communities and their reclaim rates, you got the people that are really low rates and they're treating it as an effluent that they got to get rid of because they don't have any option to put it, which is kind of where we are. We have to put it in a spray field. And if we exceed the capacity of the spray field, we got a real problem because we can't put it in Lake Dora. On the opposite side, there are communities that have places to put it. For instance, Apopka, they have rapid infiltration basins that they put into the aquifer to help build up the water supply in the Central Florida area. So they have option. So they treat it more as a commodity, which is, as we grow into the areas outside the city, basically east and north of 441, we will be coming back and treating it more as a commodity as we grow. So right now, we're still in is an effluent issue, but in the years to come, we will be coming back to council and say it's now a commodity because we're having to augment it too much. It's costing us money. We're augmenting with potable water. And so now it needs to be close to potable water costs. But if we make it too high right now, we run the risk of exceeding the capacity of the break bills. Did I answer your question?
In its simplest form, right now, the policy actually helps the core area of the city by disposing the effluent. But it does evolve over time. And I think that's the important thing. And there's a little of science and art involved in doing this, but clearly as growth, that aspect will change with how you price the reclaimed water. But it is a benefit right now because of where we're at with our capacity for dealing with the effluent disposal.
So I'm assuming then when we have Thrill Hill gets finished up, then we'll have adequate storage for all of this?
that will be a game changer.
Is your microphone on? Ms. Dillon, is your microphone on?
Sorry, it was off.
Okay. Mr. Olson?
I don't want to ask questions now, but I just wanted to suggest, at least from my standpoint, I have a host of questions. I thought I'd let them go through all of their slide first, and then if I could go through.
That's fine, but is there any problem in answering a few questions?
However you want to do it, we're comfortable
I'm
either way.
comfortable, maybe some questions or, fresh, if it's okay. Yeah, if you have some, but if you got a list of them like that, if you want to wait, that's fine too. But if there's something that, you got a good one. I just follow up on something that Mrs. Tilt mentioned, though, about the impact fees. Okay, that we have new development downtown, okay, in the downtown area and whatever, which there's no way they're going to have reclaimed water. Are they paying a reclaimed water impact fee, or is that strictly for the development that's putting them in at that point?
There's a separate reclaimed water impact fee that reflects the level of service that we see reclaimed water customers using. So again, if you don't have that service available on where you connect, you would not pay it. And I would just like to add from Ms. Tillett's information, I don't think we can conclude that that core group has subsidized reclaimed water, because you have charged an impact fee that's designed to pay for the conveyance facilities to deliver that water to the neighborhoods, and all those new homes over the years that hooked up paid into an account to pay for those lines. So it's not as, it's something you need to address in the future, I believe, and I think you do need to recognize that it will eventually become a commodity. In our discussions with staff and some of the specifics, we didn't think now was the time to address that. We have other communities that we have, but as John said, over on the East Coast, we've got clients that reclaim is $5 a month all you can use for certain neighborhoods. And that's probably not the smart way to go either for the future, but they did it for the same reasons, because they were under regulatory requirements to get rid of effluent in a way that was non-traditional to use reclaimed.
And to just kind of put you discussed also as far as how the reclaimed water rates compare against those of the neighbors. As you can see, for a monthly usage of 10,000 gallons, $14.21 is a little bit higher than the neighboring Florida utilities average of $14.06. Another recommendation of the study was to implement a price index adjustment clause, which a lot of utilities in Florida do have, and which would call for automatic rate adjustments each year if there was no if it wasn't superseded by a rate study recommendation, that the utility would just continue to annually index rates to make sure that inflation keeps up with inflation. And our recommended automatic rate adjustments was 100% of the change in the CPI plus 1%, but not less than 2%. And this kind of clause is is heavily favored by bond rating agencies, as it gives them more assurance that utility rates will keep up with inflation, and there's less implied risk of default on debt service payments. So we talked about, we briefly talked about impact fees, which are recover the capital costs applicable to new growth. They're very common in the utility industry, and especially throughout Florida, and they have been historically used by the city as a capital financing tool. And they support a policy of growth paying its own way. The idea being that to the extent that we don't have these impact fees, we'd have to increase the user rates to fund growth-related projects or growth-related debt service. So it basically reduces the debt service component of the rates for existing users. So the last...
One question just while it's convenient. So your analysis, your recommendation takes into account also adopting impact fees to keep the rates as low as possible.
Right. And we are proposing lower impact fees. Sure. Because we took a look at the cost of installed assets and also the multi-year capital program in our calculations, and we didn't. We felt like we've talked with a lot of utility attorneys as what the most defensible approach is for impact fee calculations, and based on this approach, we are recommending some lower impact fees, but impact fees that are kind of closer to the average.
That makes sense too, from your neighbor's standpoint and competing in this economy.
Development friendly.
Yes, but I just wanted to make sure that the impact fee calculus was taken into consideration in the impact fee recommendation, or in the rate recommendations.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I can also just remind you, legally defensible. It's very important. Yes, they are going down, but if we had to require them if any developer was to challenge it, and we brought them in as expert witnesses, we'd be in a good position, we think, to defend that, so.
Thank you.
And we talked about how we were proposing to lower. What we're proposing to do is to separate. Right now, there's a water impact fee and a wastewater impact fee. We've kind of separated the wastewater impact fee into wastewater and reclaimed water, so that the reclaimed water component would be only charged to those that actually have reclaimed water service. But as you can see, the current, in this chart, the existing rate is $6,331 per equivalent residential connection, which is basically the usage of a typical single-family home. We're proposing that someone that has water, wastewater, and reclaimed water service would pay $5,280 per equivalent residential unit, or someone that only has water and wastewater service would only pay $4,640. And as you can see, these fees are still a little bit above the average of the neighboring utilities. And one of the questions that was asked in the January 5th presentation was what would be the effect if the impact fees were lowered to an amount that's lower than the recommended amount. Right now, we projected about impact fee collections of about $1 million per year. So if you knocked down the impact fees by 10%, we'd have $900,000. So that hopefully gives some perspective on what that effect would be. We just and then the final aspect of the study was miscellaneous service charges. And these charges, we took a look at current utility costs to provide the service, comparison with similar charges of other Florida utilities and city policies. Now, these charges are a little bit different in that to the extent that they actually shift the cost recovery to the people actually requesting or using the service. And so to the extent that they do not fully recover the cost of providing the service, basically the monthly user rates have to make up the difference. And so, we think it's good policy to for the person who benefits should pay, and so we think it's a good thing. And this slide here just kind of illustrates the proposed changes. As you can see, we are proposing that a customer deposit be implemented for reclaimed water service. The city does not currently have a customer deposit. We're proposing increases to the termination charges, to the service charges for restoring water service. We are proposing the implementation of a late fee equal to 5% of the delinquent amount with a minimum of $5. The idea being that the city does incur some administrative costs associated with delinquent accounts, and so it does take some staff time to process these delinquent accounts, and so it makes sense to delinquent customers to pay for some of the admin time.
I'm assuming all of those in the miscellaneous service charges are to pay for the administrative costs. The cost, otherwise the regular customers are paying for it, is what you're saying.
Exactly. The meter or connection charge, that includes the cost of someone actually going out, and it reflects the cost of parts and supplies and the use of city equipment, city trucks to go out and install that meter. And to the extent that we don't recover the full cost of providing, that just means that the monthly user rates do have to subsidize that cost.
Does a 5% delinquent charge have interest accruing? Do you anticipate any interest accruing to the 5% if it's over a long period of time, or is it just straight 5%?
It could be, however, it could be just straight 5% up until the account is actually cut off, until the meter is cut off for non-payment.
Okay. And that 5% complies with state law allowing it that much of a delinquent charge?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And it's very consistent with I think in our report, we did have a miscellaneous charge comparison that kind of showed the late payment practices of other utilities. For example, city utility, Umatilla, for example, it's 10% of the total bill.
Okay. You've convinced me. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
Okay, we're on that page. I got a question for you. And we have the different meter sizes. What is the typical meter size and on the houses that we have?
3/4 inch.
Is it 3/4 inch? Mm-hmm. Okay, my next question is, why is all the rates doubling, and if not more than doubling? We're going to be putting in the same meters next year as we're putting in this year. Mm-hmm. So why would the cost be doubled at this point?
Okay, let me take it from here. Okay, so all these things are intended to be cost-based, right? And with respect to the miscellaneous charges, particularly the meter connection charge, that's the current cost today of installing a 3/4 inch meter. So when you look at it in perspective of why is it doubling, it's because the current charge is not fully recovering costs. As you move forward, John, I believe you're also using more expensive meters today. Are you not using digital meters?
Using digital meters, and we haven't had a rate increase in the meter charge in quite some time.
So the idea is to bring it to cost. So the doubling doesn't reflect any policy statement. It just says, what is the cost of installing a 3/4 inch meter?
And again, to quote Mr. Pastu, it's defensible, right?
Absolutely, because it is cost-based.
We've been sleeping at the switch in that area for several years, it sounds like.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I think, again, given the fact that we are moving the impact fee, which is also applied to new connection downward, it really reflects the fact that we're looking at the cost. Brian said developer-friendly. We're not trying to be developer-friendly. We just know that we can only charge the cost of providing the service, and that's what these fees reflect. Now, with respect to that impact fee, one of the things that happened, and we wouldn't recommend it, but your last study, after you implemented them, you indexed them, not to inflation, but to an engineering index that had them going up each year. But the fact is, with respect to the assets that those fees recover, a lot of that's already in the ground and had capacity. You had sewer treatment capacity. You had capacity in existing assets. So it isn't necessarily appropriate to index those costs up every year when those costs have already been spent and provided capacity for future growth at the time they were spent. So part of the reason that fee got out of alignment was this indexing policy that the city had in the past. We're not recommending that you do that as you move forward. The state law says you should look at them, they should be recent and local costs. So a lot of our clients have interpreted that, at least on impact fees, look at them about every 3 years, and especially look at them if you're adding a large amount of capacity, because that could affect the overall cost of what it costs to serve new growth.
Thank you.
On that, I think developer fair would probably be a good way to put it.
That's correct.
I had a question on the termination charge. Is that typical, or do some some cities have a connection charge in lieu of? I know it's front and
There's
back.
different combinations. We do see communities that have a reconnect charge after disconnect for non-payment. In this case, the charge is applied upon disconnection, not upon reconnection. There's a number of practices that are out there. It's safe to say that almost all of them are increasing because utilities are seeing more and more skips and receivables are growing in some communities. So it's a way to try to encourage people to pay their bill on a timely basis.
So a termination, I mean, every customer, I got in town, 20 years ago, whatever I paid, when I turn off my service, I'm going to pay $20. Is that what that is?
No, I think that it's a termination. It's for non-payment.
Oh,
it's
okay.
Termination for non-payment.
That's different.
Yes.
And I'm assuming if that's not paid over a period of time, even that's attached to the lien on the house as well?
Yes, sir. That would be, that would be part of any outstanding bill.
Thank you. Okay.
So we've essentially covered most of we've covered the user rates, impact fees, and miscellaneous charges. And so our recommendations were to adopt the user rates, including the price indexing adjustment clause, to help ensure the full cost recovery and address the capital needs, and also kind of put the system on the right track to financial sustainability. We would recommend that the city adopt the proposed impact fees, which we consider to be cost-based and defensible and developer fair, and also the proposed miscellaneous charges, which are, again, cost-based and just based on right-sizing the cost to actually provide the service.
Could you go back to the chart where we show the alternatives? One of the points I wanted to make for you, because again, when we met last time, obviously the rate increases that we're recommending are significant, okay? Whether you look at them on a dollar basis or percentage basis, let's face it, they're significant. So one of the exercises that we went through with staff was we didn't come to this conclusion to say we need to make the deficit up now. What we did was we actually used the model and we worked together to investigate different alternatives to see what was possible. And one of the points I would make to you about the scenario one that was in play, the alternative number one, which was in play, we talked about, where we spread the impact of trying to get the rates up to where they belong over 2 years rather than one, is our concern is the working capital. That's really what drove the recommendations. To me, our target number for you is in the $3 million plus range, just over $3 million. And we're sitting here today at the beginning of 16, into 16, the forecasted balance of $1.1 million. If we do a two-step rate increase, that's going to be down to $800,000. That's not a lot of working capital for a utility, and especially if you do have to go and access external capital in the future, they look at two things. They look at cash flow and they look at cash balance. And that's why when you look at the third scenario, to try to spread it out over 5 years is really not tenable, because right away you're almost at only $500,000 in capital, and it declines until it goes negative. So, I know we've kind of put you in a box and we've asked you to take some fairly drastic action, but I think, there was some thought put into it, and we didn't just say, let's just increase the rates and fix it all at once. We said, is it possible to spread this out? And the view is that, it's really important to have adequate capital reserves on the system, and we really started in a deficit position, in effect. In other words, the reserves are well below where they should be right now. So we have to try to work our way out of that.
I don't think you have put us in any box at all. I think prior councils or prior management has put us in this box, and I commend Vince and John and Mike and those that have brought this to our attention, this tough nut that we have to look at, and we have to step up and express responsibility for the future and for the entire citizenry to run a business into the ground, which is where this was headed, was not good. I'll use gracious terms, is not good. And so it's not your fault. You're to be credited for giving us the good, the bad, and the ugly right here.
Well, as a bearer of the bad news, I'm a little reluctant to ask for these kind of rate increases when we don't need them. And I assure you that, if you take 2 years to do it, which is certainly doable, but again, a failure in one of your plants could eat up those capital reserves fairly quickly, and that's why we came back with the one-time increase.
And then we're into borrowing money or increasing mill levies or things like that, right?
Yes.
Well, that was going to be my next question is, did you all, or did anybody consider, like taking out a general obligation bond to pay for some of these things? The other thing is, when we look at the multi-year capital program, I see costs in here that I'm not sure what years. Pardon? Page 7. Where under the first one we have the line extensions at $5.5 million. That I'm assuming is the Britt Road line extensions, or is there anything else in that besides that?
We have these.
I'd sort of like to go down through this because there's one I think we can just toss out. I think we've already made the decision to toss out that biosolids solar drying facility. That's $1.5 million. I mean,
we got to just.
Sorry.
Yeah, we had a discussion regarding that. Let me make sure we're all on. Can you pull that up?
It's page 7.
Okay,
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And as you go through it, Mr. Pastu, can you, because we're talking 2016 to 2020, I want to see if there's any way we can stretch it out. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I just am having a hard time with telling the people in my district that they're going to have a increase in their rates without, really need to scrub our costs.
Conclusion, there will be rate increases.
Yes, but I'm just not sure of we've had rate increases all along.
A point of information, when you're going through that, if it's possible, if you can just indicate something that might come from a different fund or a different source. Not that moving jelly beans around solves the actual spending, but at least just to know what the options are.
If you would, this chart is a 5-year chart.
Okay.
So, for example, the line extensions, they're throughout the 5 years. So if you would, if you got a copy of our study, I know you've been given that. Mm-hmm. If you would go to page 229, table 2.8.
That's section 2, page 29.
Yes, I'm sorry. Section 2, page 29. And it's table 2.8.
I'm getting there. I got it. Yep.
So this sums up for you the capital plan by year and also by funding source.
Okay.
So if you look at the funding sources, we can't use any working capital because we don't have any to use. Rate revenue is minimal, only $50,000 in 2016, and $50,000 each year thereafter is actually being directly funded from rates. You've got impact fees that we're using. Again, I'm going down 16 of about $2 million. And you've got some previously issued debt that hasn't been used up of about 2.3. We do have an SRF loan, so we are borrowing the capital early on. And that's on line 131, shows the borrowing. There's another loan on line 134. So my point to you is this: the build-up the rate increase in the first 2 years, we could move these capital projects around, we could take one of them out, but it's really getting the working capital back up to where we belong early in the game, if you will. Over the next 5 years, we're trying to get that working cash up to where it needs to be, and we haven't really relied on the rates in the first couple of years of this plan to fund a lot of these things. We're either using debt, we're using impact fees, or we're using some money that we borrowed in the past that's still in the construction fund.
Well, Tim, I understand. Thank you. To me, debt's a four-letter word. However, if you take out I guess it's called a general obligation bond.
Long-term type.
It's a long-term type of thing where you would have 30 years or whatever to pay back the principal and interest. And then, to me, that says that future growth, people who move here in the future or whatever and have, got skin in the game will also be able to help pay that back. So I just am asking the question, has that been considered, and if so?
Yes, ma'am. Approximately that. If you go to the pie chart again, Brian, if you look, you're exactly right, okay? If it's a recurring need, we need to replace so many miles of line every year just to keep ahead of the curve and make sure our infrastructure isn't declining and falling apart. Those recurring needs, we need to get new vehicles and equipment as they wear out. Those recurring needs, you want to fund out of rate revenues because you don't want to borrow that because it's like using a credit card to pay your monthly bills in your household. Now, when it comes to long-term projects, big capital, that's where you want to use either impact fees or debt. And you're exactly right that you want to spread it out over the life of the asset, and you want the people that use it over the life of the asset to help pay for it. And that actually keeps rates down if you use it judiciously. Because, again, you couldn't save up enough money for some of these improvements in the short run. So we have used a significant amount of debt in the plan.
Okay, so that's covering the $2 million of downtown streetscape from the water system and an additional $2 million for wastewater and reclaimed and the wastewater treatment plant replacements and wastewater treatment plant expansions.
If I may, I think the first two are really, each line item for the water and wastewater reclaimed are really the big ticket items. Half of it is, when you look at line extensions, some of that will be in line relocations. The line relocations, let's think of the projects that we have on 44 and 441. Those are big ticket items that within the next couple of years, if not early 2017, you're going to be doing a bond issue to pay for those. And yes, exactly. And some of it will be extending the utilities into areas where we anticipate the growth, of which when we do a debt obligation for that, we'll be able to use impact fees. The one thing that wasn't mentioned is that when we did the impact fee for both water and wastewater is that we broke it between plant and line. In some ways, the significance of it is the line utility impact fee. The developer can put the line in at our specifications and receive credits. So we're not putting the cash outlay. We really want the developers, if they're going to put that in there, we'll give them the credit and shift the risk, if you will, from the financing to their end. But it's built into this assumption here that we're doing it this way, but all things considered, we would prefer the developer to do the installation of the utilities on their dime, and we'll give them credit as the connections come along, so we're not engaged with the financing associated with it. And then as you proceed through a lot of these other items in here, you're looking at a lot of what I would consider to be related to renewal and replacement activities. You got an old system, you're going to have to put some money into it, and I include that as part of the downtown improvements. I know there may be some question about what was done with the first three phases, but given the magnitude of the project and certainly the condition of the utilities, it was very prudent to replace all of the utilities as part of those projects. And Absolutely, $4 million is what you're looking at to replace an outdated utility system in our downtown, whether it's stormwater, water, sanitary, sewer,
Just do that? Didn't we just do
for the first 3 phases, but there's 2 more phases to go.
Mrs. Tilt, just speak up a little bit more when...
Sorry, I just said, haven't we just done that?
And there's more to come.
There's a lot more to come, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And unfortunately, we have a city.
They're still old.
If Mount Dora wants to take an isolationist type view that we're going to be, not going to expand, not going to do anything in the future, we're still going to be faced with replacement costs.
Absolutely.
And all the other costs are going to keep going up, and you're just going to have a less of a population help pay for it, and which means huge increases in the future down the road. So just want to go back to a comment, that Mr. Olson made just a little while ago. I don't want to get into a thing here. I look at this as not looking at trying to put any kind of blame on anybody. Past councils, past administrations, past people who've worked here. But look at this thing here as I think as a good learning tool for the future. It's a good critique of our policies and things that happened in the past and things that we can do now in the future, to look at it now and to put some internal controls in place that this does not happen again. And this is totally, and I realize everybody's coming from here, this is totally unfair to the residents to be asked because of inaction in the past, that we're asking for these kind of increases now. But Mount Dora is in a unique situation too, that we are looking at some great growth going on here, and if we don't prepare for it, we're going to be, I think, left holding that bag, and we have some great opportunities here to do it, and unfortunately these needs are going to have to be met somehow, and we'll just try to do our best we can with it. And
when I mentioned past councils, I was excluding everybody at this table.
There you go. Okay.
It's been 10 years since the study.
But it's
my point is 10 years since the study, and studies should be done every 4 or so years to be...
As dynamic as you're going to be in the next few years, I'd say we should probably update this in about 3 years.
Yeah, and so 10 years is a long time to be having blinders on, essentially, and councils aren't to be blamed for that in one sense, because somebody should have stepped up, former managers, whatever, and said, this is what we need.
But it didn't happen, and you know what, but I think, like I said, it's a learning lesson now that we can turn around and prepare for the future and make sure that we constantly have these. We're already being, and it didn't take, I'm not a rate expert or, like you guys are, but I can see very quickly that if we don't do another one in 3 years, based on our needs coming up, that we're going to be in trouble again maybe in a few years. So we need to look at this again.
Mayor, to that point, since '07, the increases up through October of 14 were 43%. So it was 143% over the 2007 rates. So I don't think anyone was sleeping at the wheel at that point.
No.
The other point is, over the last 5 years, the city of Mount Dora has spent $16.3 million, and only 1.7 of that has been financed with the last revenue note that we got. We do have, for the 441 relocates, we do have $5.8 million set aside for that. When we get to, if and when 44 goes in, there's 2 pieces of that puzzle. One would be the Britt Road extensions, so that we avoid borough water notices up to 40 times during that stretch of construction for both the Lakes Mount Dora and the Loch Levin. So I mean, that's one of the reasons for the Britt Road. However, the Britt Road extension eventually will get impact fees from those to recoup that, because we'll have to we're going to be most likely the ones to put that in. But down the road, there will be impact fees that we will continue. Unlike what Mr. Pastou said was for the innovation, they may be putting it in, we'll give them credits back as people come online. So it's their nickel they're using. instead of ours.
With that 140% over 10 years, which is a good healthy increase.
It's good healthy increase.
We're still in the position that we are.
Well, we used a lot of cash.
Yeah.
The last impact fee study was done before the economy fell apart.
Thanks to 2008.
And we have not had the growth that was anticipated during that, so we should have gone ahead, like we should in the next 3 years, come back and do another study.
Yeah.
I mean, things are so dynamic between the last one and this one, and maybe even to the next one. We just don't know what the economy's going to do, so to be judicious, we probably should, even though we tried with our rate increases over the years, it's still judicious to make sure that the projects that we're doing are quality projects. And another factor I think that's happened recently is the estimates that we were using. I think they were mostly going out the door because of the parkway that's being done in I-4. All the contractors are being eaten up by the state, and we're going to have to pay a premium to get people to come to us.
Well, I'm impressed with the study. I don't know where the numbers will fall, but where the council will agree upon, but doing this study was a great experience for me to read. I don't understand much of it. The experts are sitting there, and I tend to trust experts, and there. You're absolutely right. And I tend to trust what you do. That you do that for your living, and you have integrity to guide us. Your integrity is what's at stake here, and I think you did a wonderful job. I just don't know where the numbers fall. That's.
And I would also like, if you want to get the key to tracking all this, if you look at that same table we were looking at earlier, if you go earlier, there's the water projects and the wastewater projects. And there's a column that says funding source. And that's the source for every project. And when you go to the page that I referred you to on page 29, you can see the summary by the funding sources. So if you want to track through and see how we funded any individual project, it's all there for you.
I have so enjoyed every bit of this. No, seriously, I really have. But so now I guess maybe I didn't ask the question correctly, but did you all consider floating a general obligation bond to get the money that we need now so that we wouldn't have a humongous rate increase?
Okay, you want to answer that?
Yeah, and I just some of it's nomenclature. To start with, general obligation is typically associated with a revenue source other than water and wastewater revenues in this case. We do anticipate issuing almost $17 million in bond obligations to try and spread that cost of capital over, certainly to cover at least at a minimum the life of the assets. The asset will last well beyond that. But so it's incorporated into this rate assumption.
That's a different kind of bond issuance.
Well, the other one would be...
You have to have, the citizens have to vote on it, right?
That would be the general obligation.
General obligation.
Of which, you would be doing then, more than likely, a millage levy. And that would be, something you could consider. I will tell you, unconventional to do that because part of the benefit of the system will be those residents outside your city limits, of which they would not share in that cost of the improvements. And so I do think from a financing standpoint as well as an equity standpoint that if you stay with the conventional revenue bonds, that it would be the appropriate action, as well as, again, structuring the bonds like we have in the past where we can apply some of the impact fees to cover that.
Okay, I guess my next question is, are there any of these projects that can be slowed down, not done away with? I'm all for development and, moving and whatever, but if there are any of these projects that can be slowed down until we can do some catch-up?
Well, I will tell you, you brought the biosolids in there, the 1.5 million, and, I will tell you that we had a good discussion about whether to keep that in there because we're not looking to essentially put any money into it. But as Mr. Shepard alluded to, the construction cost out there is very volatile given the level of work and the limited supply of contractors. And so, I'll be honest with you, we left that as a contingency line item in there. If some of these other costs run over, we at least got something to fall back on. So that was our contingency, if you will, to, even though from our end of it, we're not looking to put any money into the biosolids at this point in time.
And if I can add, we made our best estimates of what we would have, but the problem we have is things happen. For instance, one of the projects we have in there is replacing the clarifier at Wastewater Plant 1. 5 years ago, if you had asked me, it wouldn't have been in the plan. Things happen that we have to replace. That's one of the scary parts about having such a small fund balance, is that if anything happens, we're going to have to do something substantial to be able to pay for it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you brought that up. The wastewater treatment plant expansion, is that, what is the capacity, what are you running percent-wise capacity at the two different plants?
As I joke, we're running maximum inefficiency. We run two wastewater plants. Wastewater plant number 1 has a 1.5 million gallon capacity a day, and we're running about 600,000. Wastewater plant 2 is 1.25, and we're running about 500,000. If we had them all going to wastewater plant 1, we would be right at the 80% that DEP would require to do another study. But what we have done is, if you had been here 2 years ago, the wastewater expansion number was significantly higher. We were actually looking at building a mirrored plant at plant 2. We have done evaluations. We're holding capacity at wastewater plant 1 for the area around it in the county that's on septic. What we're going to be proposing to council is that we abandon that we look at diverting flow that now goes to plant 2 to increase the capacity of plant 2 that's available for future growth. But that will be for future discussion.
That's a future discussion item.
So we're not in, we're sorry, push my buttons here. We're not in any danger then of needing to build a whole new wastewater treatment plant, because it sounds to me like you're running at about half capacity at both plants. So we've got plenty of expansion room.
We have done a significant study, and we feel very comfortable with where we are.
Okay.
And if we pay for it.
And now poor Mr. Rowlett has been waiting. It's all yours, Ed, I guess.
Just the plant expansion, it will be impacted.
I will take my seat to be quiet.
Mr. Rowlett's ready, that's fine, and, but I noticed that you got a lot of colored tabs, you got some colored tabs, I don't see colored tabs, but you got notes, okay, but, so, go to it, guys, and get your questions, asked, and, and piggyback on each other, and get the questions out.
A couple things. Back with the wastewater plant 1, I see $605,000 for upgrades, $575,000 for clarifier, $806,000 for expansion, and $72,000 for redundancy.
So you're expanding, you're upgrading, and redundancy. What if we cut that in half and whatever we had to do to get it right without all these separate figures?
Wastewater plant 1 is an extremely old facility. The redundancy part has to do with the oxidation dish. It is a single train oxidation dish, so if we have a problem with the oxidation dish, we have a problem at the plant. As opposed to wastewater plant 2, we have dual oxidation dish, so that if there's a problem with one, we're able to divert the flow to the other. That's what the redundancy project is. Because one of the things that we look at is reliability of our plant. The one thing that we cannot afford to have happen is for one of our wastewater plants to be shut down. The clarifier is rusting, it's in bad shape, it needs to be replaced. So, as I said, the redundancy, reliability, that's what we're about, and we looked at these very closely. We're being very conservative with the project. We're not asking for a wish list. We're only asking for those things that we deem are critical.
Well, if we did an upgrade, couldn't we get the clarifier and the redundancy all done at once? I mean, you got well over $2 million into this.
Well, the upgrade is hardware and software. The clarifier will have adequate capacity when we replace it, but it's other parts to the system. For instance, the weak link theory, the chain's only as good as the weak link. Well, in the wastewater plant capacity, there's usually an element of it that it's the weak link. That's what we're talking about fixing.
Well, what I was getting at is all of these items could be combined maybe as an expansion. And we save money if we did it all at once versus $605,000 here, 806,000 there, 575,000 over here, and 72,000.
I'll be sure to remind you of that when I come back, and I want to do it.
Yeah. Well, with all that, as far as money, how much are we going to receive from the discretionary sales tax? That was sort of iffy this past year, but it has been passed, so how much of that can go into play?
I'll answer that. We've got $1.2 million in annually that comes in the discretionary sales tax. Now, next Tuesday night, I'm going to basically start talking to you, even though I won't be around afterwards, but I want you to start thinking in terms of how you're going to allocate that into the future. X amount for roads, X amount for sidewalks, X amount for downtown parking, X amount for other park improvements, those type of things, so that you have the ability dedicated for that purpose. But what it doesn't include is any of the electric utility use or water or wastewater, since those are primarily revenue generated, and also, again, the beneficiaries of some of those plant improvements will be residents that are outside. So from an equity standpoint, to keep that, much like with the property tax, the discretionary sales tax, to be a benefit immediately to the residents and businesses within the core area of the city.
Thank you. And like Ms. Tillett said, with the bond issue, and I know a lot of this will probably being spent on the Innovation District, extension, whatever you want to call it, adding water and wastewater and everything else out there, and with the Britt Road, maybe that would be, new construction could be a bond issue, and then we spend the rest of the money that we generate on maintaining our existing systems.
If you look at the chart that's up on the screen now, the green and the light blue are bond debt. That's nearly 2/3 of the entire package is bond debt of some sort. So, this discussion about bond debt, a very substantial, I'm sorry, tell me more.
Another 16% is impact fees, so the rates are only picking up.
Right, the yellow and the grayish color up there on the top is really the only thing the rate is picking up. Between impact fees, the light blue and the green, or some type of indebtedness, or having somebody else build it.
And the bond debt is ideal as far as debt goes because of the really rock bottom interest rates.
As Ms. Tillett said earlier, when you do a bond debt, the advantage of it is you're building it at today's price. I-4 has had an impact on our construction costs. We've already seen it. When 429 is bid and 46 is bid, our construction costs are going to go up even more. We can get debt right now at 2%. 429 gets constructed, 5% easy in our increased construction costs. So we actually saved 3% by going in debt now and getting it built now at today's construction cost. That's one of the, not many times in my career have I been able to say that. But we're in a really unique environment here in Central Florida.
So I guess my follow-up would be, if it's so attractive to do that, why don't we go for more and thereby mitigate the the rate increase for usage rates.
Well, you're still going to have to pay for it, and you do have a requirement when you issue a debt obligation that you've got to spend it within a specified period of time, usually the maximum of 3 years. They get into this issue of arbitrage, which is, yeah, exactly. And, yes.
For that?
Yeah, and as city managers have. But you do have to the timing of, that's
I
that?
think you'd look great in orange.
Yes, thank you. That's of no consolation. But, you know, you do have to, I think, you know, you're looking at probably in early 2017 about a $10 million or more debt obligation. You've got that much out there with the utility relocations and some of the things with Britt Road and getting the Innovation District started. And that's not inclusive of what Mr. Roulette is talking about, which is really most of that's going to get funded out of that little yellow slice there, which is the renewal and replacement amount. If you look up here, you know, that's 12.4%. Some of those improvements at the plant are going to come out of that source of money, of which we don't have anything really, which is a regrettable situation. I know Mr. Thomas and Mance have talked about getting that reserve up to well over $1 million, which is where it needs to be. We've got needs without any source of funding, to be honest with you, so.
Well, that was a fair question for Ms. Tillett to ask about we should bond at the maximum that we can. For the reasons that she mentioned, finish. Please finish.
Well, the Innovation District, it's now a real huge pipe dream. I read an article recently, it's going to get maybe fired up in 9 years and could stretch out for 55 years. So somewhere along the line, we need to be ahead of the game, but I think we need to take care of, as I said to Mr. Pastou before, take care of our stuff. Our existing water pipes and sewer and everything that's already in our city, and then be ahead of the game, but plan for the future for everything going out there to the Innovation District.
If I can share, staff has had meetings with 3 pretty large property owners about residential development because of the Wakava Parkway. Those projects could be impact fee credit projects. That's what we're talking to them about. So in reality, what I'm hoping will happen is those residential developments will pay for the pipeline to serve the Innovation District, not the Innovation District the other way around. That's one of the reasons that we really pushed hard with Henry and Brian is that we wanted to bifurcate the impact fees into lines and plants. Because in the past, if we had done an impact fee credit, all of that impact fee would go to that project, and then you wouldn't have money for the plant expansion. So by bifurcating it, we have money set aside strictly for putting pipes in, and we keep the money in a separate pot for the wastewater plant expansion or the water plant expansion, whichever.
Thank you. Almost. Please. With that, I know we can trim some items here on the projects here, like we were talking the biosolids and then the Thrill Hill thing. That turned out to be something different than it started out with. So we can save several $1 million, or like Ms. Tillett said, we can prioritize the expenditures, and then we'll be able to, lessen the blow to the taxpayer when it comes time to increase the rates.
Well, just,
all yours, sir.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, just in reply to that is, certainly the Thrill Hill is, the $600,000 is an obligation that we have to take care of this year with the combination of providing the site plan approval at the county, remedying the breach of the dam there, and I think just doing the preliminary engineering, which is a condition of our approval with the county and also for our consent. So that one's an obligation that we have, and it's already budgeted. But I will tell you again, and Mr. Thomas and Mance alluded to it, a lot of what's taking place is to get these reserves back to where they need to go. There is, some incorporation with the capital projects, but there's not the primary driver of the rate increase. We've got to get our cash balances back to a condition where they should be.
And if I could amplify on that, we're talking about, and clearly, this plan is highly leveraged. There's very little of it that's being funded from the rate impact, if you will. But if you think about if we're going to go forward and we're going to go to capital markets and ask them to loan us money, they're going to want to look at these projections. And if we don't resolve or have a plan to resolve our working capital, you're going to pay for it in higher interest rates. Now, if you go to the state revolving fund, they're not as, that's a single interest rate. That's not a market like revenue bonds. But there again, they're going to want to see your plan and where you're headed. And so part of this, the early impacts, and that's the unfortunate part, but the early impacts, which are the biggest ones, are really just to get the thing financially healthy again. If we were to trim, let's say, $2 million out of the capital plan, the way that I see it and the way the cash is flowing and the way it's timed, that's going to affect those latter year increases and not necessarily the first one, or if you elect to do it over 2 years. So, one of your options might be that you adopt a 3-year rate plan and you come back and revisit the out years as things get clear. But I will say that having the rates in place and having a 5-year plan, one of the first thing that SRF wants to see is what's your 5-year financial picture look like. And they're going to want to see that the projects are funded, that you've got adequate cash flow, you can repay the debt, and that you've got adequate reserves. So, I think there is some you can't change the trajectory of this plan, and ultimately that is driven by some of these projects. But the ones that are leveraged, those projects that we have in here for debt, it won't make a huge rate impact because you're paying for that over the long haul. So again, if we have some specifics that we want to move around and examine, but I don't think our initial conclusion that you need a fairly significant rate increase, either over 1, at the most 2 years, is going to change a lot because we readdress the capital needs. I think that's Mr. Pestu's point.
Yeah.
I'm on my old page 13, but you'll know what I mean. The water and sewage maintenance index, you said, is between 5% and 6% per year.
Yeah.
Is that a national standard of some kind?
All that is the average rate increases that utilities are seeing nationwide.
Nationwide, that was
It's
my
not a cost index, it's a rate index.
That was my question. If I could go to your page 10 and old page 14.
Everybody was doing
Your page 10 of the handout.
Let me go. Okay.
That graph.
Oh, the multicolored graph.
The bar graph. There you go. No, just past it. There you go. The green on that graph is net debt service.
Yes.
Why in 2019 is the net debt service so much larger than the previous and post years? What's
In 2019.
19? Why is the debt service
Well, that's
so
when
large?
some of our new debt is coming on. But also, this is net debt because we're also able to use impact fees to pay a portion of the debt.
I got you.
So this is the net debt that would flow to rates.
I missed the net debt part. If you could go to the next page with the one that one. In the top graph with the yellow one, under water system, the percentage is 5% adjustment for water systems, and wastewater is 2%. Explain again to me, to the slow mind that I have, why the 2% for wastewater and the 5% for water?
Well,
adjustment.
What we've done here is we have looked at each system so that the revenues support the costs of that system.
Okay.
Now, we believe, especially since you don't have some systems we work with, the wastewater and water customers are virtually the same. You've got a significant amount of wastewater water customers that aren't wastewater.
Okay, I say, sure.
Let me bring up one other thing.
I think I get it now.
Well, this is significant. The second wastewater plant was put in 10 years ago. we just opened a second water plant. So we have operational costs for a second water plant that was not there, and so we're splitting the revenue between two plants.
Therefore, a higher percentage adjustment, I got that. One other question. And going down to the lower left graph, the one with the large blue, what I'm guessing is that this graph shows that with your recommendations, it will still take 4 years until about 2020 to realize adequate working capital. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So, I mean, that's a significant, I'm more visual and auditory, and that kind of stuck out that we're going to be still waiting for 4 years before we have adequate capital.
We think it's sufficient.
Yeah, and
Just that.
Yeah, I know, but I mean,
what we've given you is a relevant range that matters. So the dashed line is 90 days of operating expense. The solid line is 90 days of revenue. We'd like to see you at 90 days of revenue if we could. And you're right, it takes till 20, but you are closer to 90 days of operating earlier.
Yes, I see that.
So that kind of is a safety condition there. But we'd like to see you moving on up to the higher target level.
Lower right graph, what makes that top orange line rise so fast in 2017?
It actually starts to pick up over time as the rates compound. And again, because we're using so much debt, the rate revenues are paying for debt, which is leveraged over 20 years in these assumptions. The rest of the cash flow is going into either operating reserves or your R&R fund. And we're trying to target 1 year's worth of depreciation at the end of the 5 years.
I told you I was slow. I just need somebody to help me through some of these. The comparison chart of the various cities, your page 17, the new page 17. I've written on the former one, so yes. The existing Mount Dora is at 6338. And the proposed is at 7724. That's a 22% increase. That matches your 21. Okay,
yes, sir.
Just so I can calculate that from a visual standpoint. And then above the proposed rate for the cities and the jurisdictions that are above that are significantly higher than us, they're doing rate studies. Most of them, I take it as well. They could go even higher, and those behind us could go even higher as well than they're shown here, I'm assuming, if they listen to rate study folks like you.
Well, we work with a number of these communities, and what we would tell you is that there are a number of them where the rate has been adopted as a multi-year rate. So Apopka has adopted a multi-year rate in their first reading. They have not finished that process. The city of Ocala has multi-year rates in place. This is the rate for next fiscal year, if you will, that'll match your rate. These are the rates currently in effect. But many of these utilities, just as we're asking you today to do, have adopted multi-year rate plans. We haven't tried to do it would take some considerable effort to do a study of what everybody's rates are going to look like every year.
Most of our money, true.
Right. But and it's not the thing we see is that typically that this thing does move upward. Unfortunately, under inflation and with the regulatory requirements, the cost of utilities are going to continue to rise. And so most of these systems either have a rate study ongoing or have already adopted multi-year increases. So we know that those rates are going to rise over the next several years.
I'm also impressed by your analysis that if we have a 2% CPI annually, in utility issues, it's probably 5 or 6% or something like that. It's kind of like airplane parts. If it says airplane, it's 3 times what the normal cost would be, or things like that, or other healthcare would be another example. So that's another reason to take a look at rate increases periodically, as the mayor suggested, is to study this periodically because of that significant additional cost increase for utility issues. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, and one of the key things to keep your eye on is the operating margin, if you will, which is revenues less operating expenses. You don't want that to deteriorate significantly because that impedes your ability to fund your R&R programs and your capital needs. So we want to have, the operating expenses are going to go up over time, and the rates need to at least reflect that as a minimum. We just talked to the city of Eustis, and our recommendation there for the rate increase just for operations was about 2% a year, just under 2% a year, just to fund the inflation in operations and not to fund any capital needs at all.
Yeah. I have others, but I think they've basically been answered with your good presentation and the questions from folks at the table. Thank you.
Okay, I've got some questions. Number one is, given the rate increase, and it's not really directed at you, this question, but I know I've gotten at least a few people that see a substantial financial impact of this, and they didn't have the ability to plan, and they don't have the ability just to raise rates on other people. So I was wondering if we as a council had the ability and the desire to put together a program. I don't know exactly how to do it, but for people who would want to make an application for some rate forgiveness or some program so that those people who are financially strapped who cannot pay this rate can apply for some sort of something. So I just want to put that out there.
I just as an aside to that, I had thought about that as well, and where we used to live, there was a fund that you could, on your utility bill, you could round up. I mean, and actually quite a few cities in Florida actually have this roundup thing where you can round your bill up. You never pay more than 99 cents extra on your bill. But where we came from in Virginia, you could, on your bill every month, you could add $5 or $10 or whatever that would go into a Help Your Neighbors fund. Now, I know that there's an administrative cost of doing that, but cities have done it, and it might be a worthwhile thing to do, at least for a few years. We don't have heating costs per se, usually, but old people need to be kept cool also, and I know in my district, I've got a lot of people who are living on $1,000 or less Social Security every month. Sometimes much less.
Well, I think one of the programs you mentioned is referred to as Operation Roundup, and that is quite common. There's a couple ways to look at it. You could come up with a source of funds within the city's overall budget, okay, and you could set those aside. The Operation Roundup puts it on a voluntary basis, and it will generate revenues over time, and you can look at that as a voluntary program. It may take I'm not sure what the extent of the problem is. You're probably going to find that out as you introduce these options, but it may need to be a combination of the two for a while. But Operation Roundup is something that utilities have used. It's really not that difficult to administer because they just have a place on the bill, you check it off, you pay the next highest dollar amount or any dollar amount you want, and that extra money goes into a fund for those that are less fortunate.
It's kind of like donating to Lake Harris Food Pantry or something like that. Just give a little extra. In my old city, my former city, they did that, and we would routinely round up, or we would add another $5 or whatever, just because we could do it. And it provided a lot of income for that city, a lot of resources for that city to help lower income people that had an application process to help lower their rates, or help lower it, or even reduce it or eliminate it in some cases.
Yes.
So, thanks. And then my other question, it was about the reclaimed water, that at times we have to dump potable water in it to hit that. Does that reflect in the charge, or does that get sold out at the reclaimed water rate?
The charge today, the rate increase we've asked on reclaim is the same as what we've asked for on potable water. So we've kind of looked at the water system as a combination of water and reclaim. So no, it doesn't. Obviously that is something that happens periodically, We have not attempted to factor those costs in specifically.
Okay. That makes sense. And then the question I had was on the chart on page 3, which talked about the fund balance. I guess, and everyone's been cordial and nice, and I appreciate that. But I'd like to see the chart that goes back 3 years, because I'd like to know who didn't put their hand up or who didn't say, hey, we're going to be bringing our fund balance to X if we don't stop spending, like, pick your branch of the military, but I hear it's always drunken sailors. And that's a concern, because I fully understand, digging out from it, and I want to be forward-thinking, but looking backward a little bit, I want to know what we could do in the future, knowing what we didn't do. Because it would seem to me like we should have, and I'm just making up stuff on the fly, is that you have a quarterly fund balance look at, or a monthly or whatever, and I would assume that the auditors should have had this in their annual report to the prior councils to say, hey, you're on a trajectory. It just would seem like that was the case, And I'm not angry about it.
No. I think it's perfectly valid, and I think part of the budget process is, where are we going to finish up from a fund balance standpoint? So, as recommended, when we, in the future, look at our reserves for our water and wastewater fund, are we hitting 1 year's worth of depreciation in the renewal and replacement account, of which Mike and I have talked to Mr. Shepard about setting up a separate fund so we track it the way it should be. And then from an operating standpoint, if we have the 90 days cash reserve, which is the prudent course of action. And it follows through. I mean, one of the budget amendments I'm going to ask you to take before I leave next week is our fund balance policy is 10 to 20% in the general fund. Well, we're in excess of that. There's a one-time expenditure I think I alluded to, but that's what we have to do during the budget is where are we going to end up? Is this where it should be along without and spend? I mean, from your end of it, I think very, has some very explicit questions. Is this the right balance amount, and where are we in relationship to that policy, if you will? So I do think it's important during the budget process is probably the right time to do it.
That's good. Discussion standpoint, let me make a suggestion, just to right to your point. I would assume, from what I'm hearing, both the table and here, is that the primary answers to your question would be the 2008 recession, number one, and probably number one, that took everybody by surprise, and that was 1 year after the 2007 study that must have made some projections and did not take into consideration a recession, significant recession. And then the second one would be, as Mike had suggested, the automatic increases that were factored in every year, 140-some% over 10 years. And so I could see the legislature in the budget process, which is a policy issue, they would look at that and say, oh, we're fairly well protected, and then the recession hit.
Well, I think
they had to start pulling back.
The construction projects, I think, really was a big drain, too.
That's true.
Yeah, that really hit hard.
It's not obviously, those factors you're talking about, but I think the construction projects and the fact that you funded them out of current cash. And so again, even though we don't want to run our household this way, debt for a utility system can be your friend, because again, it lets you pay for the assets over their life. We don't do that in our normal lives, so it's sometimes hard for us to get our hands around that. But what if you had to go back again and look at it over again, you probably should have borrowed some of those funds and preserved your cash. Right. Unfortunately, you can't go back after the fact and do that.
I guess the question, or part two of that is, our auditors, it seems like, should have been yelling at us to say, hey, you got below the 2 million mark, or whatever the number is. And I know Mr. Pastu was great. Very early in his tenure here, I heard him talking about this particular fund. So I knew that he was on top of it at that point, but prior to that, I think...
and just for the expectation, the auditors are just going to tell you what the numbers are. They're not going to tell you, they may, if you were deficient or have a negative, but from their very limited scope. They're just going to validate the numbers that are on the financial statement, and rarely will they go too far into telling you what you need to do, regrettably, unless there's something obvious. But I think a lot of it will fall on management to track and follow this for the city council during the budget process.
Makes sense to me.
You got more? Oh, I'm good for now. Okay, cool. Yep, or all the way.
I just had one, and I'm on page 12 of tonight's slides. And it's a question. I think for the sake of the city, the recommended increase is 21.2%, and then in 2016, and then going back to a more inflationary 3.3, 3.4 makes sense, and I understand we need cash. We got to build those reserves up. I am wondering, though, based on what Mrs. Tillett said and others alluded to, if scenario one or some variation of that might be offered as an alternative to families, I don't know, below a certain income level or whatever, that would allow, 20 or 25% of people who are on a very limited income to, instead of going with a 21% increase, that maybe they could step into it, 7% a year for 4 years instead. Something's always up and something's always down. And when I go to the gas station lately, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is half of what it was last year. But that's not, buy a Hummer. But that's not going to last either. And other things are going up faster, health insurance and so on and so forth. But I just wonder whether there is a possibility of offering different options that might accommodate families who just would really struggle with a 21% increase.
I think you ought to go back to that. Yeah, I think you probably go back to the application process that somebody was alluding to earlier, and because if you give somebody an option, well, you want to pay $10 increase, you want to pay a 5, or you're going to pay to 5, and then you're going to be back in that bind again. So there's going to be a lot of policy decisions to go along with that.
Can you do that legally?
Well, I would just say, I think a better policy would be to set the rates citywide and then deal with your income situations through the kind of programs that were discussed earlier, because I think, one, it would be very difficult to administer, and you'd have an office full of people that are just checking people's financial backgrounds to determine if they qualify. What happens if they're unemployed and they get a job? How do you follow up and make sure they're now on the right rate? So I think the better thing is to set the rates based on costs. They are the costs, and then to go back and try to find a way to help those that need help through another avenue, as opposed to use the rates to enact that kind of policy.
Good point. Thank you.
Real quick, you've been in this business a while. Is there any state programs out there for this kind of assistance that you're aware of?
Well, I think there are assistance programs. As far as state, I'm not aware of any utility bill ones. We have churches in communities that get involved and help folks. They obviously have help with other parts of their budget to help make money available. I don't know of any statewide or federal program to pay utility bills.
Just looking at, not to reinvent the wheel, if there's always something that we can tap into and, as a resource, but if not, yes, the churches, everything else that you mentioned, those would be the vehicles that we probably have to use.
The federal government has that heating assistance program, but that wouldn't apply.
Not to water.
I think the step-up programs are administered by the different cities. At least that's what I've been able to find, but I haven't read through all 17 Google pages, just the first couple, so that's what I was able to find. Mr. Mayor, just, I know that there was at least one person who, in the public who was, okay.
If it's okay, you just, and you have an answer for a question real quick?
Well, what you were alluding to there, our people in customer service we have a list of organizations who provide help, and we'll give that list to the people, and it's up to them to go get it, and then, so that organization decides how they're going to administer it.
Real quick then, thank you, Mr. Stoll, for reminding me that. I'm going to open it up to the public that we have here, and for any questions or comments that you might have, lady in the back. Just state your name and address.
I don't know if you want that. My name is Deborah Palmer, and I live in District 1. And my question is on page 13, where you talk about the 9,600 water customers. So I'm assuming that means residents. Mm-hmm. What is the percentage of them that are not people that live here all year round? Do you know that? I mean, because I'm not here 5 months a year and I use no water. But I still pay a water bill because I have a minimum of that. And does that affect why some of this is down?
Wants to answer that? So that is a very good question.
Well, I just want
No, that's a great question.
No,
we had this
actually-
question in Ocala, too.
No, it's an excellent question, and it kind of goes back to something that Brian and Henry brought up earlier, and that is, like in the city of Houston, the average is 5,000 gallons per month. Typically, in the business, you figure 90 gallons per day per person in a household. So if you did the math, what you'll figure out is the snowbirds are bringing the average down for the whole year. So that 5,000, 6,000 gallon figure you're hearing is depreciated because of snowbirds. So.
One of the things that your rate structure includes is a base monthly charge that's the same amount every month regardless of use, and then a metered usage charge that increases, particularly as you use more for irrigation purposes. It gets fairly significant. So that base monthly charge is billed year-round, and that is an attempt to recognize that about probably just on average 80% of your costs are fixed in the utility business. So it's not intuitive, but when you have a reduction in sales, because that's another thing that could have occurred, as people conserved during the recession, you were losing some of that discretionary irrigation revenue you were getting before, because those are the most high dollar rates, or the higher rates for discretionary use. So the intent of that base charge being billed year round is to help pay for the costs for those that aren't here, because when they come back and they turn their tap on, the capacity's there for them, and typically they all come back at the same time, which is what drives the capacity need of the system. So it is fair to charge that base charge and to charge it year-round. Now, not all communities do that. Apopka is looking at doing that now because they were just shutting the meter off and not billing you if you were gone for that summer season, if you will. So, again, you have something in place. We could put more in that rate, but the downside of that is it affects that smaller user more, too. So that person that lives here year-round that's only using a couple thousand gallons would be getting a much bigger bill. So there's a lot of trade-offs in this.
Ma'am, do you have another question?
It's still in that group.
Okay.
So when you talked about the 7,000 gallons, are you going to pick one of these amounts and say that, okay, we're going to assume that everybody uses 7,000 gallons? No. Okay. So like when I'm not here and I only use the minimum, which is usually, it's just about what that 2,000 gallon is, that'll probably stay pretty close to the same?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Nice to see you again.
Okay, and just real quick, if you're not here, I'll just, I think to step back to what you said, if she's not here and she's shutting her and she's not using any water at all, okay? But we'll assume that you don't have an automatic irrigation system, somebody's watching for you. She's not using anything at all. She's going to have a base rate at that point. So there won't be anything like 2,000 gallons or anything like that. It's not going to be, she won't be in that other, let's say if you have a 2,000 level, a 5,000 level, 10,000 level, it's going to be a base rate level. So it's going to be a base rate level regardless.
Right, the usage charge is based upon metered use.
Metered use.
The base charge is a flat charge per month per bill.
Okay.
It's like a connection charge.
Because we have a lot of us in our district.
Yeah, you can, we refer to as a readiness to serve charge. Because that's in effect, it's helping pay for that infrastructure.
And no, I have no problem with base use charges, and because I think this is maybe one thing that in the past maybe that could have caused issues. I don't know how long we've had base rate charges here, but we need to have everything that we can have a base rate charge on should be charged a base rate, and that's one of the reasons I think it'll help keep those costs down in the future. And,
there's quite a bit of variation when you look around the state. In South Florida, the base charges for water and sewer service are well over $40 a month. But what you will see where you have that high base charge is when people do conserve, or when we have really wet weather and people aren't using as much, they don't have the volatility and the revenue swings that the systems with low base charges and higher usage charges have. So again, there's the trade-off between revenue. You try to strike a balance, and I think your balance is fairly well established.
I know for a fact that since '07, we've had the base charges. I don't know exactly when they went into effect, but we've had them for some time.
That's good.
Have they been stable the whole time, or have those increased along with the usage rates?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else from the public? Sir, name and address.
Hi. My name is Nigel Priest, and I live at 101 North Grandview. And I've got one or two questions, and I'm not sure who to ask them of, but I'll ask them anyway, and I'm sure that I'll get some useful answers. First of all, on page 14 of the presentation here, I'm noticing that the difference between the current monthly bill and the proposed monthly bill is greatest for the people who are using 7,000 gallons or producing 7,000 gallons of wastewater. And that seems to be the group that is largest. Is this really a fair thing to do to the largest group, to give them the largest increase?
Well, what's driving that phenomena is we cap the wastewater bill for residential service, because commercial it's not capped, okay? But for residences, the implication is that someone who's irrigating that's paying this tiered irrigation rate for water that goes up as you use more, that's their water use. At some point when they're irrigating, that does not go back into the sewers, okay? So the presumption is that you shouldn't bill for, the bill for wastewater is based on metered water use, but not all metered water goes back to the sewer. So there's an actual cap that says you pay the base charge plus the sewer use charge up to the cap, and then it doesn't go up after that. So that's what's causing that effect.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I understand. Thank you. Okay. I'm listening to talk about the expansion of the city and development, and I think that obviously it's happening, and we're all pretty much happy about that. But I'm wondering whether the developers are being asked to pay as much as they perhaps can or should to be connected into the system, both for fresh water and for wastewater. Is this not a potential additional source of revenue for the system if we were to increase the amounts that they are charged, or would this put people off developing in our city completely? What do we think about that?
Okay. One, I'll point out that in the funding plan, we are using quite a bit of money provided by developers. Let me get back to that chart. So roughly the wastewater and reclaimed impact fees are providing about $5.7 million and water about $1.7 million. Now, we don't set the fees based on what we believe development can pay and how it might improve the rate picture. There's quite a bit of case history in the state of Florida, and you have to follow what they call the dual national rexus, which says that you got to pay the cost of the benefit that the new capacity receives is the maximum you can charge, and then you have to use those monies you collect to pay for that capacity. So it's strictly cost-based, and as I explained to you, even though we are asking that they go down to some degree, that's based on the fact that the past cost-based rates were indexed up at a higher rate than your costs actually rose in recent years. So when we trued it up, if you will, to today's costs, we could not support even the existing fee, but close. We came very close to it. But to charge more than that would put you in a position where and especially if you said, well, as a policy, we're going to charge more for new development because they can afford it, that would be a bad policy because you would be challenged by those same developers, and they would prevail.
Mr. Presto?
Yeah, just as a follow-up, Mr. Shepard, our city attorney, when we were talking about public art, talked about that proportionality. That's exactly what that issue is they've got to be paying proportionally the benefit that they're receiving. And based on the study and the case law that goes with it, our consultants are comfortable with the impact fee rates for the water and wastewater and reclaimed.
Yeah, my understanding, to piggyback on that, is that that's driven as much by the rate studies as it is by the law that requires us to have an appropriate level, and without that, we wind up being defendants in a lawsuit if we push the top edge too much, and developers will have no problem hiring hungry lawyers to sue us to do that and get their attorney's fees back. So I think that's a wise, the rate study is what supports us, is what's so pleasant to hear.
I think that's my answer. It was a nice idea, but it isn't legal. So thank you very much. Two last ones, very, very quickly, if I may, please. How does our rate of line breaks compare to other cities around us? And also, how old is our system compared to other cities? How old are our pipes compared to other cities?
As noted in the one chart that we added, 25% is basically the age of the pipe. 25%, I believe it was, is based on tree roots, and about 50% is based on people and contractors. Generally, for the size system and based on my past experience, we're a little higher than most places. The trees is a significant element. You know, if you took that 25% out, but I'm not advocating getting rid of trees. Don't get mad at me, Mr. Phillips. But, you know, it's part of the price. It's part of the price that we pay to have, you know, Tree City, USA, and all that. And I'm not, you know, but based on past experience, we have a higher incident. And the other thing to remember is, on this side of 441, it's an aging system. Downtown, we had 6-inch loop pipes. Based on ISO fire flow rating, we needed 12-inch loop system. And so the businesses downtown are benefiting from having that higher fire flow and a cheaper insurance rate because we did upsize the lines and we replaced an aging system. Okay.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, those are all great questions, and appreciate that. And definitely will not advocate getting rid of any trees, but I think we need to really look at our policies where trees are placed, and with the new development. And I'll just use my development as an example, where we have small lots, and they're forced by the city to put live oaks right on top of a sewer line, going out of the house. And right next to a sidewalk, and that is just going to cause major, major problems when these things start maturing, and you're already aware of some of those issues up there, so.
Take a trip around the country club.
Oh, I know, I'm watching, your sidewalks is just amazing how high they can go, and, actually, skateboarders, we already got to build a skate park over there, all those hills you got over there, yes.
Smart.
But anyway, anybody else from the public wish to have any comments, make any comments? If not, Mr. Pastu, any closing?
Let me just wrap it up. I think that's where we're at.
I think we are.
We do have the public hearing scheduled for next Tuesday night. Beyond that, there's no action. I wanted to go through this exercise tonight with the workshop so that you were more comfortable with it, and following that, we would be looking at amendment to our water and wastewater ordinance that would go along with the proposed rates. In the meantime, what I would ask you to do is, I do think that again, you have the recommended 21.2, but potentially paying it over 2 year. It would help us from a staff standpoint if you gave us some direction after the public hearing, which way you would like us to consider, or if there's any other issues to go forward. So
Again, I think the public hearing, I think you'll have some ideas. I'm just wondering if it's possible and to take some actual bills and low end, high end, medium, things like that, and
I brought mine along.
got your own, and I just wanted just to put them in, do we have those?
I think Mr. Shepherd was actually working on a spreadsheet where you could plug numbers in based on were you working on that, Mike?
Yeah, I have a spreadsheet that you can plug numbers in for whether you have electric, water, sewer, irrigation, reclaim.
Sanitary, all that.
It's going to be on the web then for people to gather?
Put it out there. With Charles's help with the electric, I expanded on that and made the sheet so that it would calculate, mirror what your bill is, so you could put in any amount you wanted. If you wanted to try to set your budget so that instead of using 10,000 gallons, you use 7, or whatever you would choose.
Okay.
So we can put that on the web if you want.
Could you maybe, I'm sorry, could you maybe have that sort of available for the March 1st?
That's what I was going to follow up, is that we might be able to plop the spreadsheet up at the public hearing if, just how you plug numbers.
Do a sample online, do a sample online. I know that, you gave it to us because we've been working, I've been working bills for some of my constituents who have called and said, help, what am I going to do? So, what's
the addresses and just...
And also, and again, it doesn't give you every possible outcome, but in your rate study on tables 3.1 through 3.4, there is a range of use for residential in particular that has 0 to 267 cubic feet, 535, 822. So there's a range. It varies between 0 and 20,000 gallons. We don't hit every level, but you can kind of look at your bill and pick the one closest to it, and you'll get a pretty good idea just from those tables.
I have a couple of questions. Is there, I see it in the electric side of the world where there's an electric audit where the power company will come in and help you find ways to save water in your lifestyle. And I wondered, now, of course, we're the provider of water. Do we have a program like that? Are there cities out there that do, or are there organizations out there that provide that sort of service so that we can mitigate the ouch?
Like the running toilets.
Yeah.
We used to have a very robust water conservation program, but in our effort to reduce costs, we eliminated the position. If you go and look at the budget, you'll see we're actually running about 3 employees short of where we were 3 years ago, and that was one of the positions. And quite frankly, I'm going to be very candid here, he's probably going to chew me out tomorrow, but part of it is that, when you encourage conservation, you're losing revenue. Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot of resources for people to conserve.
Oh, yeah. I'm an economist, so if those people that are complaining ferociously about the water bill, I just want them to have an opportunity or a way to mitigate it. And I have my final question, I think, is about utility tax. that the bill, of course, will increase. The utility tax line, I forget, you're looking, does that also increase because of that? Is that a taxable item, and if so, where does that tax money go?
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
The utility tax is based on water and on the electric. Wastewater is not, stormwater is not, neither sanitation. That money, the utility tax goes into the general fund to supplement that.
On my $100 bill, it was $1.89, for what it's worth.
No, it's just two.
That's true. Okay, anything else from council?
I just wanted to say thank you to, I know you will do that too, Mayor, but from my standpoint, I'm impressed by John and Mike and the work they've done on our staff, as well as Vince and PRMG and their study that they've done. I feel good about the integrity of the study. I feel good about the integrity of the staff that supports the study. And we only have to make a number of decisions now for the benefit of everybody, but we certainly have great resources from which to make that decision. So I wanted to say thanks for that.
Okay, just I'll record that, and on behalf of the council and everybody who took part in the study, thank you for all the work that you've done. I know a lot goes into it, and I'm looking at this, when I looked at it, it's just a lot of numbers, a lot of things, and I relied on some of my economists and other people here on this council to ask a lot of great questions, and I really appreciate the questions that were asked from the public tonight. They were great questions, and I think it added some thoughts for everybody here. And again, thank you everybody for the time, effort, and that's it.
Move we adjourn.
Got a motion?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.